Reproductive justice, it is a human right. So it's rooted in three tenets. The first tenet is that you have a right to have a child. The second one is that you have a right not to have a child. And the third tenet is that you have a right to raise this child in self sustainable, thriving neighborhoods and places. And that you have all the resources that you need. And you should be able to raise a child in an environment that's free of violence, free of hatred, all of those things. It is rooted in bodily autonomy and your actual own ability to decide what it is that you want to do with your body or what you don't want to do with your body. And understanding that oftentimes in this country, that has, or even because actually reproductive justice is more international, that oftentimes, especially with people who sit at the margins, who are cisgendered women, trans folks, or non-binary folks, they oftentimes don't have a lot of agency. So it's really rooted in those tenets around this is our body, we have a right to it, and an understanding that um, the decisions that oftentimes affect the community are determined by the women in that community's ability, or not ability, but by their choices to have children or not, if that makes sense. So yeah, next slide. So here's a quick little video that we're gonna play for you. That's kind of gonna re-explain all that, but more in a fun, cartoony way.
Reproductive justice. A lot of people talk about it, but many don't know what it really means. Here's the basic idea. Coined by 12 Black women in June of 1994, the term is the combination of two phrases, reproductive rights and social justice. The new phrase reflected the lives and experiences of Black women in the United States who had been denied a full range of services and protections. Black women have multiple identities, like age, ability, sexual orientation, immigration status, religion, and nationality, just to name a few. Consider the fact that Black women experience some of the highest rates of poverty and only make 63 cents for every dollar a white man makes. Nearly 20% of Black women have no health insurance and die 4 times as often as white women from pregnancy-related causes, regardless of income or educational status. The issue at play here is intersectionality, a term coined by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, which refers to how multiple systems of oppression work together. Reproductive justice is how we take on all the systems that harm us. Reproductive justice is the human right that can only be achieved when all women and girls have the complete economic, social, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions about our bodies, our families, and our communities in all areas of our lives. Reproductive justice centers the leadership and lived experiences of the most vulnerable, including but not limited to Black women, women of color, LGBTQ people, and youth. So there you have it. Reproductive justice has given thousands of women a framework to change policy, improve services, collaborate with other social justice movements towards our collective liberation. For more information, contact In Our Own Voice at www.blackrj.org. Thanks for watching, and welcome to the movement.
All right, thank you so much for playing that video for us. So yes, so these are kind of to break it down a little bit, so it's more digestible. So these are all the things that oftentimes you will see organizations and folks that are fighting for that fall under what we would consider reproductive justice. So it's all of the things around, sexuality rights, our reproductive health rights, birthing, also looking at the elimination of patriarchal violence. We intentionally will use patriarchal violence because, so pop quiz, why do you guys think we use the term of patriarchal violence? Before I tell you, anyone? Want to take a guess? Nia, go ahead.
Just so it's like more inclusive to like all marginalized genders, question mark.
Okay, anyone else?
I would say it's because because of the way that the patriarchy has made our policies and even just the culture in our society surrounding abortion and reproductive rights in general, then not allowing abortions or autonomy over our own body is a form of violence against those bodies, because it's taking that autonomy away from them.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I was thinking that it was because we were trying to get rid of pronouns. And it was just that, it's instead of saying elimination of male violence or something that people would kind of click with, it's a way to get away from pronouns.
Okay, awesome. You guys are really smart. So it kind of is a little bit of what all of you said. Patriarchal violence really looks at kind of like Heather said, like the violence that just being a part of a system that's overall patriarchal. And kind of what you even said, Heather, around like, it's not about pronouns, right? Like it is looking at all of the ways in which the patriarchy has harmed us and our bodies in a violent way. So even you, Nia, you hit the nail, you hit the nail right on his head. It's oftentimes when we think of, you will hear it used interchangeably with intersectional violence or gender-based violence. And more specifically, oftentimes it is used to talk about police violence, right? So a lot of people believe that just Black men, cisgender Black men, are the primary victims of police brutality and police killings. But we know that statistics have shown that Black women are also, they also are very high rates of it. And not just that, but also sexual violence by police. We also know that Black trans women, they only have a life expectancy, unfortunately, of 35. And in the state of Ohio, we are one of the most hostile and volatile places in how we treat Black trans women. And then on the flip side of that, we say patriarchal because many times women, regardless of color, are also oftentimes survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And so all of those things, violence falls under patriarchy. And so that's kind of why we use like this overall arching theme to say, hey, it's not just police violence. It's not just like gender-based violence. It is the entire system. And sometimes it is just the laws and policies that are in place that really affect our bodies and determines whether or not we can do it with our bodies. So in our next slide, I'm going to go over some historical facts with you guys around to like kind of break some of this stuff down more, give you more context. But like one of the things is I remember learning that for a while, you could not get birth control in this country when you were married without your husband's consent. Like that is an act of violence, right? Like, what do you mean? It's my body, but my husband has to give written consent before I get like birth control? That sounds crazy. So it's things of that nature that it's all of these violent things. Also, we look at like safe, accessible contraceptive. Oftentimes we want it to be accessible. We want people to have access to it, but also we want it to be safe. And what we know is that oftentimes it has been tested on people without their knowledge or not tested on everyone. Same with economic justice. In the video, they said that like Black women only make 63 cents of the dollar. I think Hispanic women is less than that, is 53%. And even white women only make, I think, 83. I have to check that. But it's still looking at that when you are not a cisgendered white man, that determines your economics. Immigration rights, disability justice, racial justice, abolition. We are an abolitionist organization. And just the overall full political, social, emotional, economic, physical, and spiritual wholeness of humanity. Like we deserve to be able to exercise and live our lives to the full extent of our humanity. Next slide. So we use the term her story, not his story. And this is some of that historical context that I talked about. So reproductive justice, you'll probably hear me shorten it to RJ. So RJ was coined in 1994. It was coined by a group of Black women right before attending the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo by women of color. Loretta Ross is the mother of RJ. Oh, I see a comment in the chat. Yes, you are absolutely right about in Mississippi. It's really sad that they still operate on, they still operate on that same rule. That's really sad. The RJ movement was designed to fight against oppressive patriarchal systems through the lens of bodily autonomy. And it explores how, that's a typo, how a woman's bodily autonomy impacts not just herself, but her entire community. Next slide. More of her historical context. So with this one, and so far, does anyone have any questions? Okay, I don't see anyone. Okay. So first we look at 1600s, Black women during slavery, they experienced all type of abuses to their body. And we think about how they were forced to conceive children. Oftentimes those children were stripped away, but yet their breast milks were used to milk the oppressor's children. In the 1830s, President Jackson, he ordered the genocide of indigenous women and children. And I had to look at that up. Like that was actually a thing that was like signed into legislation that the president actually ordered the genocide of indigenous women and children, which is ridiculous. And this was occurring on American soil. It was not even overseas. 1875, the US Congress banned unmarried Asian women in the country. 1943, it was testified in court. So with this one, there was a court case that happened years later. And during this court case, they found that 110,000 Japanese Americans were sterilized without their knowledge. And it was under an executive order while they were in internment camps at Tule Lake. So for a lot of you that might not know, similar to concentration camps, America had its own version of that, in which they called it internment camps that we put Japanese Americans in during the war. And so these camps, they were very inhumane. It was designed to socialize them into like white American culture. And it was very traumatizing. And so there was forced sterilization. Again, this occurred on American soil. In 1956, the birth control pill was tested on women living in low-income housing. So a lot of these women in low-income housing in Puerto Rico did not know that the birth control pill was being tested on them. And what we know now to be safe limits of progesterone and testosterone, or even back then, the amount that the CDC thought was safe, they made sure that those levels were at least 20%, 20 times higher than that safe limit. In the 1970s, again, we see more forced sterilization of indigenous women living on reservations. 1989, Stonewall risings. And so Stonewall is when Black, trans, and LGBTQIA were actually being brutalized by the police in New York, and they were fighting for their rights, which ultimately led to what we have now as Pride Month. It really did start with the Stonewall uprisings. And so in the 1990s and 2000s, we actually saw more laws that were being passed that criminalized pregnant. Olivia, I can't see the rest of this. I'm sorry. That sentence on my screen.
It says we're past criminalizing pregnant women on drugs disproportionately targeting Black women.
Thank you. So yeah, and I think we can pause here. I see it's a lot of comments in the chat. You guys can definitely come off and tell me what you think as well. If anybody wants to say anything, you can come off mute.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
I could have just, I don't know, I could just be like, I need to brush up on my history, but I thought the Stonewall uprisings / riots were in 1969. But I could just be wrong. I mean, like, I know that there was something in 1969, but I don't know if there was like something else in 1989.
No, I think it was 69.
Was it 69?
Yeah, I think it was
Oh,
like,
you're absolutely correct. It was
yeah,
69.
like
That
June
was the only
30th,
typo on us.
30th,
Yep, June 30th.
69.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for catching it. Any other comments?
Yeah, sorry. No, I just added, yeah, I don't know if you saw my comment. I think this is a really great, thorough explanation. No, I just added for like people who don't know, because I'm really interested in medical anthropology. And a big topic of discussion is that the field of gynecology in the United States was built on Black women's bodies. The father of gynecology, he actually experimented on enslaved women's bodies. He would like cut them open to kind of study their reproductive organs. And at the time, I think when he started doing this, anesthesia wasn't available, so they were awake for most of it and in pain. And then once anesthesia was made available, it still was not used on them. So there are a lot of, and also there's like a really crazy history about it that I think is just like fascinating and not talked enough about. But also a lot of those women, after they died, their reproductive organs, like parts of their labia, and those things were kept in jars and put in museums for people to come and see. And I'll also just drop a book in the chat that like talks about it. That's really good. No, I just always think it's worth mentioning because I think it's really interesting and not enough people know about it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. As many historical gems as we can. Couldn't fit all of the stuff on 1 or 2 slides. So I appreciate you guys for also bringing in more historical facts, because I wanted to keep it like kind of brief, but like try to touch on like a variety of different things. So I just appreciate all of you guys. And it just shows like we have all the right people because you guys are so smart. So yes, if there's no more comments about this slide, we can go to the next one. So yeah, why is all of this important today? So as many of you have noted, like those issues just didn't go away. They have been transformed. They still exist today. And certain things are still really, really horrible. And so we know about like there's horrible high amounts of high infant and maternal health rates in this country, especially amongst Black women and especially amongst other indigenous populations. And during actually the Trump era, we also even saw an increase in the amount of infant mortality and morbidity deaths amongst Hispanic women. And so, which even shows like how toxic stress affects the body and just how having to deal every day living in your body, dealing with racism and the oppressive society and the violence, how it really does affect the cortisol levels, which has a lot to do with you being able to carry a child to full term. We see currently they're trying to ban critical race theory. We shout out again to Kimberly Crenshaw, who also created critical race theory. We see that happening. Just trying to ban it across schools across the country. We also see that there's more attacks on Roe v. versus Wade. And we did not think in a lot of ways that the Supreme Court, with some of their previous cases, were going to decide some things, but they actually are siding on some really pretty big prominent cases that kind of conflict with R v. Wade. And just the lack of women in political positions of power. There's not enough women, Black women, Hispanic, Indigenous women in really political positions of power, which hint is why Ohio Women's Alliance exists. And just looking at the pervasive state-sanctioned violence on Black families, right? Like we think about the Black Lives Matter movement and all of those who have lost their lives and the families that are still fighting. And there's a lot of folks who are afraid to have children in this type of climate of wondering, like, is my child going to be next? So we know that the fight continues today. It is an intersectional fight that spans across genders, across race, and multiple identities. So this goes to what is our approach? Oh, Roy, yes. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
You're
Go
good.
ahead.
I had a quick question, kind of out of curiosity, but when you were talking about infant mortality rates, I know that they're like particularly high in Columbus. I was wondering if you knew like what the reason for that was.
Yes. So a lot of it actually has to do with the discrimination that happens in the medical sphere. And it's across Ohio. It's not just Columbus. It's Ohio has one of the highest infant mortality rates and maternal health rates. There's shout out to Rep Erica Crowley, who was able to finally get a report published back in November of 2019 that showed pregnancy related mortality deaths across the state of Ohio. So a lot of it has to do with racism. Another thing that has lots to do with it is toxic stress that is put on the mothers who are dealing with that amount of racism every single day, and the cortisol levels that the baby also feels. Also, mortality goes to, it still counts as infant mortality if the child dies before reaching the age of 1. So it's not even just like when it's in vitro, it's also when you actually had that child. Some of it has come down to like a lack of resources. That's why we're pushing this doula bill so heavy, because having a doula makes a world of difference. Having someone that's advocating for the mom in and out of the hospital for correct treatment. So there's a myriad of reasons for that. And I can get you some more data on that as well. And I see there's 2 other questions. So I want to make sure I answer those as well. No problem, Roya. I can't tell who's next. Who is first with the hands raised? Is it, okay, Krista and then the Black Heather?
So I just wanted to echo what Alana was saying about infant mortality rates. That's something that I've studied a lot in Ohio. And one of the main reasons is providers do not get implicit bias training in school. And then also there's a culture of not believing Black women's pain, not giving Black women the same amount of options. So the only option that a Black woman might get is you have to be induced, you have to have a C-section, and it becomes more complicated from there. With a pregnancy and birth that might be totally normal, has now become much more complicated and dangerous because of interventions that weren't necessary and wouldn't be offered to a white woman. And then there's also a lower level of breastfeeding with Black women because they're not given the same resources. It has nothing to do with ability. It's about access to resources. It's a huge problem in Ohio.
Yeah. And with the C-section thing, a lot of people wonder why doctors push that. So if you have a normal birth, you're probably out of the hospital within 48 hours. C-section is a major surgery. So that means that's more money for the doctor, more money for the hospital and the insurance companies. So really it's money. And it's
it also has to do with time.
It's time, because a doctor can schedule it and still go on vacation. Whereas, he has to kind of stay around when you are going to, when it's like an unpredictable, like normal pregnancy, quote unquote normal, because the baby can come in at any time. So there's a lot of coercion that exists. And thank you so much, Krista, for lifting up those other data points. And we can also, if you guys have other questions around that, there's some great organizations in the state of Ohio that does a lot of work. So Root RJ in Columbus, Birthing Beautiful in Cleveland. And then there's the Milk Mission, who promotes breastfeeding amongst Black women in Akron, Ohio, that I also can connect anyone to for more information. And thank you for your patience. The Black Heather, you want to go?
Yeah, so really quick, and this is just to respond to you, Roya. Another reason why we have these high rates amongst Black women is because they do that when you are grouped in as Black women, they have it with anybody who appears Black, right? So they don't split it up saying, hey, I have somebody from West Africa who is circumcised, right? They don't even acknowledge those women, And so when they do end up having babies, and I've been in the birthing rooms with them, they do they advocate for themselves not to get drugs. And because sometimes the interpreter can't say certain things to the patient, they don't even get the resources that they're allowed because there is a barrier on communication. That's one thing. A second thing that I just really wanted to uplift is that Black women, like what was said before, they are tolerable for pain. So a lot of hospitals orchestrate on, oh, she's not hurting yet because her expression of pain is different. She might not be screaming. She might not be moving around, or she may be cussing you out. And then there's no one advocating. So I love the Black doulas. I'm so glad that you shouted them out, because I was definitely about to holler Root and the Milk mission, because I really love them. I've been following them. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So we always want to make sure that we are giving credit where credit's due, and that we are lifting up the powerful people across the state who's doing this work, who's championing this work, and who are resources. So even if you guys come across anyone who becomes pregnant while you're in your internship, and you're like, hey, I want some resources, or do you know some people? Reach out to us, let us know, because there are amazing doulas and organizations across the state. And we do now have a maternal health caucus at the state legislature, with a lot of our Black state legislators, Rep. Stephanie House, Rep. Crawley, Rep. Sykes, all of them are involved. And there is a doula bill right now that we at OWA is really advocating very hard for, to make it so that people on Medicaid that have that doula coverage is covered under Medicaid. So thank you all for those wonderful comments. And for this part, so this is like OWA, right? So we gave you the historical context. We gave you some facts and things. So now we want to switch gears a little bit to show you, how does OWA, like how do we actually, how does RJ show up in our work? And so for us, it is that we are creating an inclusive intersectional cooperative. Our cooperative is our membership-based leg of our organization. We created it so that relationships could be fostered between women of color across the state. It provides elements of wellness and healing. As Erin mentioned, a lot of this content is heavy, right? Like, and we're just talking about it and learning it. And for some of us, this is our lived experiences. And so we have to make sure we're taking care of ourselves and providing each other opportunities to take care of each other. And so we really do center self-care. We know that oftentimes the people on the front lines are those who are most impacted, who are most vulnerable. And so it's not just us leveraging the power of our members and just like, hey, mobilizing them to do actions. It's also investing in their leadership and investing in their holistic selves, and making sure that we're also offering opportunities for wellness and healing. It is also a hub to further our work of expanding the electorate in Ohio and building political power. We don't have enough women who are actually in political power in the state of Ohio. I did a redistricting training last night, and one of the shocking statistics that I find is that Ohio is only one of 6 states that has never had like a woman governor. And so it's these type of things that it's like, wait, what? We have to make sure that we're putting women in position. When we look across our state house, we don't see many women of color that looks like us. And for many of us locally in our cities, our townships, we do not see a lot of representation of women of color, of people from, the LGBT community, QIA community. We don't see them represented in our county, nor in our council seats or anything, or our mayors. And so it's really, really important for us to expand that electorate and make sure that we're investing in women's ability to vote, because we know that when dollars are put to the table, we know that when policies are equitable and fair, we show up. We show up when it's not fair. We show up when all the barriers are there. But we want to make sure that we are advocating and fighting for it to be easier access for women in our state, to be able to show up at the polls, to exercise that right to vote. And right now, OWA, we are diligently advocating against the House Bill 294. Jasmine, that yesterday, is doing a lot of work at the State House to make sure that harmful voter suppression bill hasn't passed, which is just like a real-time example of us doing some of that work. And that's our job here. Like, we strategically are monitoring harmful policies. We are using the power of our members to pressure elected officials, and we're committed to social change. And so social change has a lot to do with cultural change. Like, a lot of things that happen, it is political, but it's also cultural. We have a horrible culture in this country. It's kind of the thing around, like, we think of our issues with policing. I'm one of those people that, like, is a culture, art, media, like, wonk. Like, I'm always like paying attention to this stuff. And it's like, how many cop shows do we have? Like, just thinking of like how this like has conditioned our minds to see individuals and citizens as bad people that's deserving of jail and being locked up. Like, we have so many cop shows, and that conditions our minds and our brains. And so we also do work around, like, how are we changing things socially, and then locally, because we have staff in 3 different regions right now, and then we invest in leaders and build partnerships with leaders in other parts of the states. We serve and we invest in those of our members who do work in other parts of the state, and we collaborate a lot with value-aligned orgs. So you heard us mention a few of the orgs that we support when it comes to, like, infant mortality and stuff, but also thinking about OPAL, which is an amazing API statewide organization. Also working oftentimes with NARAL and URGE. NARAL does a lot of reproductive rights stuff across the state. URGE is another RJ org that really centers young people and getting them involved. So those are just a few of the orgs that we oftentimes collaborate with, and there's so many more. And then, thanks to Olivia's genius, we use a lot of our digital communication as an educational hub, because we know that we are in the age of technology. A lot of us get our education on social media. And because of her skill set, we're able to make sure that we're able to execute timely and accurate and informative information in a way that makes us a trusted messenger in the state of Ohio. And so, long story short, we approach RJ politically, socially, and transformatively. We believe in transformative justice. We're grassroots and grass top. So, it's between those. We are advocating and supporting those individual leaders in our communities who are not attached to an organization, and we're supporting those who are attached to an organization. We are values aligned, we're relational, and we're issue based. And I'm sorry, Olivia, again, I can't see that last line. I don't know why.
It just says we put the needs of our members first.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.